Dan, can you remember the first time you heard the trumpet?
The first time I heard the trumpet? Yeah, actually, when I was probably about 8 or 9. I think, we all in that era grew up with the Tijuana Brass and Herb Alpert. But my childhood hero, was actually another trumpet player. He was a classically trained player that ended up playing jazz in a lot of New Orleans music, called Al Hurt. And I ended up getting all of his recordings and listening to them. I mean, he was a wonderful trumpet player, and I think he was a real pace setter back in those days. We're talking early '60s now.
And when you hear those recordings now, with all your experience as a trumpeter and as a teacher, do you still find them just as good?
You know, absolutely. I think that he did things on the trumpet that I've not heard too many people be able to do, and with the musicality and with the soul and with the passion and commitment.
Do you know anything much about him apart from his recordings?
No, you're you've caught me off guard there, because I should have researched it a little bit more, but no, I know I think he was classically trained. I don't want to say where.
Yes, sure.
But it was interesting because he did a recording, sometime in that era. I think we're looking at early to mid '60s with Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops, and it was a recording of the Haydn Trumpet Concerto, along with a few other things. I mean, the Haydn, if you're going to compare it to other recordings of the Haydn, okay, it's got Al Hurt all over it. It's got the stamp of somebody who plays a lot of jazz and a lot of New Orleans sort of music, but some of the other stuff is just wonderful.
But can you still enjoy the Haydn?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I enjoy his Haydn. I enjoy. Every time you hear that piece, you get something else out of it. As I continually say to my students, yes. I mean, it's the reason that piece is the standard as far as trumpet solos.
Do you think if it was possible to do sort of research into it, which piece has convinced people to be trumpeters the most? It would have to be the Haydn, wouldn't it?
Well, as far as in the classical field,
yes,
I would say.
I'm talking about the classical field.
Yeah. Well, the Haydn Trumpet Concerto. There are other pieces that are a little bit flashier. I mean, say if you hear, say Timothy Dockschutzer play the Aratunian Trumpet Concerto or the Popnikova. I mean, these are pieces that are sort of Armenian, Russian, and a lot flashier. It depends on, I suppose, where your soul lies. As far as what's going to attract you to playing the instrument.
Now, it's interesting what makes people fall in love with their instrument. But let's go back a little bit further. Did you start off on piano, Dan? Or did you?
I did. Yes, I started off on piano, probably at the tender age of 7 or 8, hundreds of years ago.
And do you remember that time?
I do remember that time. There was I grew up in the United States, and I was born in New York City, and then shortly after, I think when I was about 6 or 7 years old, my family moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And there was a woman who basically taught piano lessons throughout the neighborhood, Mrs. Phillips. I still remember her. And I hounded and begged my parents for piano lessons. For some reason, I guess all my friends were doing it, but there was something about playing music. I mean, I didn't come from a musical family. My father was a doctor, a pathologist, and my mother was a science teacher when she was working. But something attracted me to playing music, and so we ended up getting an old upright piano, and of course, electronic pianos back in those days were not even heard of. So I started on the keyboard, and then probably I can remember the moment I decided the trumpet was for me. There was a buddy of mine who lived on the street, and I was I think I was about 9 years old, and we were messing around in his older brother's room, and he pulled this case down from the closet, and his older brother had played the trumpet in high school, and pulled this thing down. It was an old Holton collegiate trumpet. I still remember it, and pulled it out, and of course couldn't make any noise on the thing. I mean, farting on the mouthpiece. Yes. I mean, we both thought that was very funny, and but picking the trumpet up and holding it, I thought, yeah, this is magic. This is it was almost like being struck by a little lightning bolt or something like that.
This is such a gorgeous story.
Yeah,
Yes,
this is I didn't, of course, at the tender age of 8 or 9. I mean, you're not going to say, well, this is what I want to do. But I thought, yeah, this is really cool.
Yes.
And so from then on, I pestered my parents for a trumpet. Now I was taking piano lessons with. I had graduated from Mrs. Phillips, and now I was on to a woman named Mrs. Ilse Karp, and anybody from Pittsburgh would know that name. Richard and Ilse Karp were the co-directors of the Pittsburgh Opera for many years, and she was a very fine, very authoritarian piano teacher, one of those sort of rap the knuckle with a pencil and or a ruler, depending on what mood she was in that morning, type of piano school. But she actually agreed to start me on the trumpet. I mean, she wasn't a player herself, but she knew the rudiments of how to set up the embouchure and that sort of thing.
Your piano teacher started.
Yeah.
So how come she knew about the trumpet?
Well, I suppose being involved with the opera, her and her husband were probably versed in everything. All the instruments to a certain degree. I mean, a certain varying degree, I guess. And so I started playing simple tunes, and it's funny because I actually picked it up and decided, maybe it's not for me, and then just had a moment, but then came back to it very, very, very strongly. I was lucky enough to have what my young band directors called a natural embouchure back in those days, and didn't really have to think about it very much. When I moved on, I continued studying the piano with her for many years, right up until I graduated from high school. But I actually moved on with the trumpet. I started taking lessons early, say about year 7 or 8, from a member of the Pittsburgh Symphony back then, a man named Frank Ostrowski, who was very, pardon the pun, instrumental in my life choices. And I think just because of his passion and his enthusiasm for the instrument, I mean, it was contagious, and he, I think, pointed me in a very specific direction. I mean, more orchestral than anything else. Of course, didn't stop me doing the Tijuana brass and all that sort of thing. When I was in junior high school, we had a little, of course, like most junior high school students back in those days, if you weren't playing with the big band and trying to imitate Bill Chase,
yes,
you were playing Tijuana brass, or like I was doing a bit of both.
Yes. Mm.
So
and then you joined the youth orchestra in Pittsburgh.
The Pittsburgh Youth Orchestra.
The youngest member of the Pittsburgh.
That's right. You've read my bio. Yeah.
A little
Yes.
bit,
I was I joined when I was about 13 years old, and it's
Do you
fun.
remember the first orchestral pieces that you played?
Let's think back. I think a lot of people would relate to having fairly similar experiences, but Polvitzian dances, Borodin, see. There was one piece that stuck out in my mind. Very. I mean, let's say I think all sorts of pieces are flooding back now. The Schubert Unfinished Symphony, which is it's actually a challenge for a trumpet player who only has a B flat trumpet because that trumpet part is in E.
Yes.
So it makes a young person think.
Yes.
A little bit. But the piece that was popping into my mind was the Romantic Symphony, the Second Symphony by Howard Hanson. For some reason, we were working on that in the orchestra, and some of the beautiful sweeping melodies in that piece really stuck with me. In fact, when we actually performed that piece with the SSO, when I was in the orchestra, I mean, all those memories were flooding back. You know,
that must have been absolutely wonderful.
Well, it was difficult when I was 14, and it was difficult then too.
How fascinating. So you joined the youth orchestra, and you finished school. And what happened there?
Well, interesting about the youth orchestra, the Pittsburgh Youth Symphony was managed by a woman named Maazel, who was Lorin Maazel's mother. Okay. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Lorin Maazel actually grew up in Pittsburgh as well. In fact, his orchestral debut was with the Pittsburgh Symphony. In fact, the horrible story where they all sat there in the orchestra and pulled out lollipops because I think he was only 13 when he got in front of the orchestra.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
So.
Well, I hope they're ashamed.
Well, I think he had his own.
Yes, I think so. Yes. That's an incredible story. Yes.
Yeah, I mean we never had Lorin Maazel as a conductor with the Pittsburgh Youth Orchestra, but it was actually a wonderful. I felt like it was almost completing a sort of circuit when he came and conducted in Sydney.
Right.
And I digress for a moment. I never forget that. I had just stupidly flown in from Canberra that morning before a rehearsal of Mahler 5. And I mean, I was okay, but kind of a little bit plain lagged, feeling a little bit stupid. And no, but he stood up on the podium and immediately put everybody to ease. And it's a very, very lonely situation, the beginning of Mahler 5.
Yes.
And conductors approach it one of two ways. They can just give the trumpet player playing the opening solo a lot of freedom, and or they can go the other way, and I've had conductors do this as well, want to sort of shape every note and every phrase. Lorin Maazel stood up on the podium and he looked over and saw me sitting there, and he said, "I think you know how it goes," and just didn't conduct the opening at all, and didn't conduct the opening at any of the performances either, which was fantastic. Of course, that puts the burden of responsibility on you, the player, but it was actually an expression of trust.
Yes.
And respect.
Yes.
And I think that the one thing I remember about his concerts was that he really he had that gift of wanting you to give 150%. Yes. And I guess that was the start of it.
Yes. And you had the conversation with him that you.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
He must have been thrilled.
Well, I mean, he sort of moved through the backstage areas very quickly. He didn't really want to converse with many of the players, but I managed to get that in.
Oh, good. I'm relieved.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm relieved. So anyway, you go to college. So tell me about your life at college.
Okay. Well, I graduated from high school, and I did an early audition for the Oberlin Conservatory. Now, that was the only college that I interviewed and auditioned for, because I was lucky enough to get an early acceptance there. It was the reason being that my parents, as pragmatic as they were trying to not so much discourage me from going into music, but trying to make me aware that there were other things that I could do in addition to music. So I actually entered the Oberlin College and Conservatory as a double major, as a science biology major as well as a trumpet major. Now, I have to admit that I didn't last very long in the biology department. I mean, when we started dissecting fetal pigs and that sort of thing,
The trumpet seemed to be very appealing.
The trumpet seemed to be very appealing, and funnily enough, also I found myself performing in just about every ensemble. Not only with the trumpet, I was minoring in voice back then as well, and I was singing in a lot of different choirs of different sizes, including a group that they call Collegium Musicum, which was a choir choir and instrumental ensemble that specialized in medieval and Renaissance music, which
What
was
a wonderful background.
fascinating.
And tell me about
yeah.
your choir director.
Okay, that's another big story. My choir director was a man named Professor Daniel Mendelow, and Daniel was originally, I think, from North Dakota. I think St. Olaf or somewhere up in the Northwest, and that was his first year starting at Oberlin as well. The year I started, which was 1972. And we got to be very close friends, and I was playing in a brass ensemble. He was a composer as well, and he wrote a lot of brass music and brass music with choir as well. We performed a lot of his works, in addition to a lot of the other very memorable pieces, like there's a wonderful Bruckner Mass. I think it's the Mass in E minor. That
Wonderful piece.
yeah, things like that.
Yes.
And of course Beethoven 9 and
Yes.
pieces like that.
So all of these things are coming together to produce the musician that you are. So you finished college, and what happened to you once you graduated from Oberlin?
Okay, well, I graduated from Oberlin, and I was a little bit precocious. I decided to give my the option was to do my final recital in first semester, just to get it over with, so I could concentrate perhaps on doing some orchestral auditions in second semester. I thought, well, the biology didn't last more than say better part of a year, so I was now a full steam ahead trumpet performance major, much to my parents' disgust. And but I think well, things obviously, luckily enough, worked out. But I finished my recital, and I remember being spring break, I think, my final year, and I got a call from my trumpet teacher, who at that stage at Oberlin was a man named Louis Davidson. Now, my normal trumpet teacher was a fellow named Gene Young, who was a fantastic trumpet teacher in the technical sense. But then Louis took over when I think Gene went on sabbatical. And we were working on, he really taught me how to approach orchestral excerpts, and taught me about looking for detail in every bar, and really being very analytical, but not forgetting the overall sort of musical context. Now, he called me in spring break, and I was surprised. I was at my parents' place, and he was on the phone, and he said, "Now look, there's an audition coming up that I want you to take. I want you to submit a recording for this audition. It's for the principal trumpet of the Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra." And then he proceeded to say, "Well, you're still a schmuck and you're not ready yet." in his inimitable way, but said, "Well, just make a good recording, and send it to Jerusalem. Would you do that for me, please? So I said, okay. Well, my senior recital went fairly well, very well, and so I submitted a recording of that, and I actually put some excerpts on as well.
So I'm going to just ask you, because it's a different time in history, how did you record them? Because you didn't do it on your phone.
Oh, exactly. Well, the recording of the recital was done in the recital hall, which
sure.
was
But I'm talking about just you,
the excerpts.
Parents' home recording.
I think it
so
was.
Easy, was it?
It was recording on a cassette deck
With a microphone.
with a microphone.
Yeah.
I think in my parents' bedroom, or in actually no, it wasn't in the bedroom. It was in our living room, which was bigger. It had a better acoustic. Yeah. So the usual excerpts, a bit of Mahler, a bit of the Pines of Rome, that sort of thing, and a little bit of Ravel, a little bit of Stravinsky, and they were foolish enough to give me the job.
So how did you feel? Were you elated, or were you a little bit?
I was.
Trepidation?
Oh no, I was absolutely stoked. I mean, I hadn't graduated from Oberlin yet, and I was already offered a full-time job for the next year in Jerusalem, and my Jewish mother was very pleased. I mean, my boy's going to Israel. I thought, well, this is an adventure. I mean, I had no qualms about leaving the United States. I had taken a couple of auditions when I was in my final semester at Oberlin, and one was for the Dallas Symphony, and I think it was just such an overwhelming experience. I mean, when you arrive in the morning and there are 65 trumpet players there. I could specifically remember, this is an audition for second trumpet. It was the first real audition I had taken. And I think 65 went into 30, and 30 went into 15, and 15 went into 5, 5 went into 2. And it was Bert Truax who ended up getting the job, and myself at the end of the day. And I mean, Bert was a fantastic player from Curtis. The principal trumpet of the orchestra at the time, Richard Giangiulio, was also from Curtis. So I mean, maybe there was a bit of an old boys thing there, or not. Who knows? But he sounded fantastic at the time, and well, I went away very happy with that experience as well. But this is before the Jerusalem thing came up. Then when I graduated from Oberlin, I was admitted to the Tanglewood Festival, what they call it, the Berkshire Music Festival at Tanglewood, which is 8 weeks of very, very solid training. And back in those days, we were lucky enough to have Gunther Schuller and Leonard Bernstein, Klaus Tenstedt, Seiji Ozawa, amongst Colin Davis as well, conducting the orchestra in all those weeks. And had a few very unforgettable experiences there. First concert I played the Firebird Suite with Ozawa conducting, and then one of the most memorable was playing lead trumpet in West Side Story with Bernstein himself conducting, which was a very fantastic experience, and one I'll never forget.
No, how could you?
Yeah. It's funny when I guess to advance a couple of years after that, I had spent a fantastic year, my first year in Jerusalem. Funny, we played, I arrived on the scene, and very few people spoke English. We were I arrived at the same time as the third trumpet in the orchestra, who was another American. He was a little bit older than I was, but we ended up sharing an apartment together in what they called the Merkaz HaKlita, which was the absorption center in Jerusalem. And by absorption center, I mean like the immigration center. So we were surrounded by a lot of Russian immigrants back in those days and a lot of Moroccan immigrants. And it was funny. It was like the House of Babel. I mean, so many different languages being spoken. In fact, it was funny. You talk about a cultural thing. The Moroccans, the story goes, the Moroccans had never seen flush toilets before, toilets that you sat on with a toilet bowl and everything. They had no idea what they were there for. And a lot of them apparently were using them to, in the summertime, to cool down the watermelons.
Perfect show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But that was my first year in Israel. Ended up, doing the Haydn trumpet concerto with the orchestra, amongst lots of other big pieces. Did she make it over to Israel for that one? I can't remember. Maybe she was in the audience for that, but we did we did Bruckner 4, we did Mahler 1. It's going back, this is 1976.
I think the only thing you could have made her prouder was if her son had become a doctor. So then you moved to a different orchestra in Israel.
That's right, yeah. Toward the end of that year, there was an opening in the Israel Philharmonic, and I thought, well, it's a section opening. It's not principal, but I mean, I have. It was only my first year out in the professional world. I thought, well, I still have a hell of a lot to learn. So just audition for it, see what happens, because it's only, it's a cab ride, an hour's cab ride across the state of Israel to Tel Aviv, and so that's what I did. And there were only, I think, 7 or 8 auditioning on that day. So I went over and played for Zubin Mehta in the brass section. And again, the usual excerpts and a bit of the Haydn, same old story. And they said, okay, well, great, thank you very much. And I thought, no, nothing came of that. And I'd gone back into the hallway where I left my trumpet case, and I was putting stuff away. And I turned around, and there was Mr. Mehta with a couple of the brass principals, and they said, well, we want to ask you, why are you auditioning for us? I mean, you're principal in Jerusalem. And I said, well, the Israel Philharmonic is where you get the, I mean, I didn't mean to sort of, piss in his pocket, or, to use an expression, but this is where you get all the world-class conductors and soloists. And I thought, well, I still feel I've got a lot to learn.
I think that was the right answer.
And, well, they said to me, look, we're just about to leave on a tour to go to Europe for 6 weeks, including this, it was a Scandinavian cruise ship where the orchestra was the invited guest on this cruise ship. Said, come with us, and you can decide during the course of this tour what you want to do. We would like to invite you to join the orchestra. And it was funny because I said, well, great, twist my arm harder, So fortunately, this was a summer break. This was
so you could take leave.
I could take leave, and but it was funny. So many funny stories. The first stop that I had to meet up with the Israel Philharmonic was in a town called, it was a village called Villach, which is about a 3-hour train ride from Vienna. So I was to fly to Vienna and take the train to Villach. And Villach is sort of like a spa town. People go there to recuperate or whatever. But they were recording there, and they were recording with Leonard Bernstein, and they're recording there was a box set of Bernstein symphonies that was recorded at that stage. So I arrived with my trumpet case and 2 suitcases, and when I got to the hotel, they said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, my name is Daniel. I'm your newest member of the orchestra. I was invited here by Mr. What orchestra?" No, you're mistaken. There's no orchestra here. And it was just the user Philharmonic security thing. They were trying it on. They were just making sure that I was who I was, and not somebody who had ill will towards a bunch of Israelis staying in a hotel. So, this interrogation went on for about 20 minutes.
Yes.
And finally, I was ready to turn around and head back to Vienna.
Yes.
And they said, "No, we're just trying it on."
Yeah.
And, it was crazy. But my first morning with the Israel Philharmonic, I sat down and I was playing third trumpet in one of the Bernstein symphonies, the Kaddish Symphony, I think. And Bernstein himself on the podium, he looks back and he recognized me from Tanglewood. He said, "Hey, how are you?" And that was a moment. Yeah. Yeah. So it's good to see you here. And so I said, "Well, it's really good to be here too. Thank you."
What a wonderful story. So you obviously took the job with the orchestra.
With the Israel Philharmonic, yeah.
And then you had another lucky break then.
Well, it was funny with the only glitch was that this was before the days of emails and immediate communication. So I did the right thing, and when the orchestra was in Berlin, that during that summer tour, I sat down and I wrote a nice letter of resignation. This was about 6 or 7 weeks before the new season started in Jerusalem. So I thought, well, okay, I'm giving you a couple of months' notice. Now that letter arrived in Israel and it sat on the personnel manager's desk because, of course, the personnel manager didn't come in until like 3 days before the season was to start. And he got this letter all of a sudden realizing he wasn't going to have a first trumpet for the next season. I mean, it wasn't my fault because I had written the letter in time, but he just didn't bother coming into work. There was a little bit of nasty toing and froing back there, but they ended up getting somebody to cover my position in Jerusalem until they got it sorted out.
So
yeah,
soon you're on your way to Sydney.
That's right. What happened was, because I arrived in Israel as a young man, and I wasn't given the straight story when I had filled out the immigration papers. They said, "Oh, look, you have to sort of, because you're Jewish, you can you immigrate to Israel. We'll give you what they call the A1 stamp, which is you're making aliyah, you're immigrating to Israel. You'll get all sorts of tax breaks. You get a lower rate of tax, and you'll be able to buy household goods tax-free, blah, blah, blah." What they don't tell you is that depending on the age you are, after 3 years, you give up what you're doing, no matter what it is, and you're in the army.
For how long?
For 3 years.
For 3 years.
Now, the problem with that is back at that stage, this is before the United States recognized any form of dual citizenship. So had I done that, I would have lost my American citizenship. They didn't really at that stage look at it too kindly. It was somebody else, joining another country's army. I was a little bit nervous about, staying in Israel for the 3 years. So fortunately, at the end of the second year, I saw the ad that the Australian Broadcasting, it was that stage, Australian Broadcasting Commission put in the union paper, advertising principal trumpet. Gordon Webb had retired or resigned from the orchestra. I think he was only there for, 4 years. But they were looking for a principal trumpet. I thought, well, Sydney, where is that? It's sort of on the other side of the moon somewhere. And back in those days, the distances were a lot longer. But I sent they wanted a tape, and they wanted it sent to the Australian Broadcasting Commission offices in New York, because I think they were having a lot of American applicants as well. And so I did that. I sent a couple of recordings that I played in the orchestra, and a few excerpts that fortunate to record in the concert hall in Tel Aviv, just standing on stage, which is great acoustically. I had one of my orchestra colleagues just hold a microphone with a cassette deck, and we did the recordings, and sent it on. Didn't hear anything for a matter of months. Then finally, I think it was like 2:30 in the morning, the phone rings, and it's somebody from the Broadcasting Commission in New York City. I had actually written a letter along with the tape saying that coincidentally, the Israel Philharmonic was touring Australia in that following year, 1978. And I said, if the tape at all interests you, I'm more than happy to play a live audition when we arrive in Australia. And I think they liked that, because at that stage, there weren't many live auditions for the orchestra. So they actually contacted me when we were, I think I was in Adelaide, and they sent through this huge sheaf of music, all the orchestral excerpts, and they said, well, we'd like you to play a live audition when you're in Sydney. So from that moment on, I stopped goofing off and started practicing, and I think practicing a lot backstage in Melbourne and in Adelaide in preparation for this audition. Then the audition day was in Sydney. It was after a children's concert, and I remember it was a children's concert conducted by Patrick Thomas. And they stayed after the concert. I think it was Pat Thomas and Don Hazelwood and a few of the brass principals. John Wood was there, and Peter Walmsley, and Tony Buttle, Rob Johnson, people who were working in the orchestra, and Russell Maddox was the principal trombone back in those days. And I stood up on stage, and I said, well, I've got this huge orchestral list of pieces. What would you like to hear? And they said, oh, we just sent that to you as a guidance. And I said, thanks very much. You could have told me that when I was just sort of furiously trying to learn a lot of these unfamiliar excerpts. And Peter Walmsley tells a story. I mean, I think I was in such a state of adrenal overload that I can't remember this at all. But Peter said that I took this sheet of orchestral excerpts and very nonchalantly tossed it on the floor. I said, okay, what would you like to hear? And I ended up playing the audition, the excerpts from memory. And they were just calling out different excerpts. Could you play something fast? Could you play something slow? Could you play something lyrical? And they also put together a small committee that went to hear the Israel Philharmonic play at the Opera House. And by then I was actually playing a little bit of first trumpet with the orchestra. I think I was playing first in Brahms' First Symphony and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which I think they went along to hear. So I guess they could hear me play in the orchestra as well.
Pretty comprehensive audition from the cassette tape, the live audition to the orchestra performance, yes. And the rest is history.
Yeah, well, they said, well, at the end of the audition, we said, well, yes, we'd like to offer you the job. And cocky little shit that I was, I said, well, thanks very much. Can I think about it? Because my parents were just freaked out.
Yes.
I mean, back the world is a much smaller place these days.
Yeah, of course.
And back in those days, I mean, coming to Sydney was like traveling to the other side of the world.
Although you were highly engrossed with what you had to do with your own orchestra and the audition, did you get an impression of Sydney from that visit?
Yeah. Back in those days, I thought, well, I can remember Sydney having a lot of the charm about it, the charm of walking down George Street, and everything just seemed to me to be a lot like what I could remember from, say, the Midwest United States, but sort of from the 50s and 60s. That's what it seemed like. I mean, this is before, this is before auto tellers. It was before, the tramways in the middle
Yes.
of the city.
Yes.
I mean, this is when Sydney was quite a different place.
A livable city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. And
So you did decide to take the job.
yes.
And then you stayed for quite a long time, didn't you?
Yeah, I was in the orchestra 34 years.
And there'll be too many highlights. But what about a couple? Did from your time with the orchestra, looking?
Oh, wow.
I mean,
Okay.
it's ridiculous to knock it down to a couple. We can say 3.
Oh well, I've already mentioned the one with Lorin Maazel.
Yes.
I mean, that was
of course, that would.
that was unforgettable. I mean, it was funny. His first concert being the Mahler 5,
Yes.
and doing that with him, and that was a real highlight. That wasn't until I think it was. People will correct me now, but it was like 1999 or something like this. And then of course when Ada came to town, I mean, a lot of people have very different feelings about Ada de Wart. I mean, I personally felt he was terrific. I think he had taken the standard of the orchestra and just lifted it up, I think. And to me, again, his very first performance with us was Mahler 5, and that was truly memorable. Then, of course, there were the concerts, some of the very emotionally charged concerts in the Stuart Challenger era, and I remember those very well. I mean, Stuart, when he first started with the orchestra, I mean, he had just come from working in the opera pit, and I don't know, a lot of people wouldn't remember Stuart, but I mean, Stuart was about 6'4", and he had arms that were about 15 feet long, and he would conduct a lot of the things in the orchestra, in the symphony orchestra, like he was conducting in the pit.
Yes.
Like this, and we used to, he was very, very welcome to feedback at that stage, and we used to say, Stuart, you're not standing in the pit anymore. You don't have to do that. Concentrate on more what's in front of you instead of what's.
Conversations you had when he wasn't on the podium, presumably.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, you would never say that to him
No.
during a rehearsal or anything like that. But I remember I was fortunate enough to be able to hang out with him as well.
Yes.
And we just have quiet words about this and sort of thing. And if you concentrate on maybe this area in front of you instead of up above your head, it's just a progression. And the whole tragedy of this thing, Mark, was that he was really becoming special. I mean, he was becoming from good to excellent to special.
Yes.
When he got sick. Yes. And doing things like a very, very memorable performance of Petrushka in Carnegie Hall in New York. Yes. With him. And my parents are actually in the hall for that one.
Proud my boy has done well.
Yeah.
Yes. And so you were also teaching at Canberra.
In
You
Canberra.
were the trumpet lecturer down in Canberra. And did you go down every week, or was it every 2 weeks?
Yes,
You flew down. And
sometimes it was like putting your weekly schedule together with a shoehorn. I mean, it was flying down. I would pick a day or a day and a half, and fly down and do all the teaching in maybe 1.5 days. And sometimes I would fly back and arrive at the airport, jump in a cab, and head straight to the Opera House for an evening performance. Something like
did
that.
it ever go wrong?
Nearly. And I remember this specific instance as well. It was we were playing, I think it was one of the coronation masses with Richard Gill. I think it was Haydn. But it was a 6:30 concert. It wasn't the normal 8 o'clock concert start. And my flight in the afternoon was canceled. I thought, my God, what do I do? And so they said, well, sir, we'll have to route you to Melbourne, and then you'll fly back to Sydney. And I was beside myself. I said, how am I going to be back? And I ended up, and I could remember running down the stairs in the Canberra airport, running to the car rental place, renting a car, getting in, and just putting my foot down and driving to Sydney. And I ended up getting into the car park about 25 minutes before the concert started. Now, some people would say, "Oh, that's not that close," but I mean, when you have to get upstairs and change and put your concert head on instead of your driving down the road head on, and that was close. But it was worth it, you know. I think that I was given the opportunity in Canberra to. I like to think of it as more of the European approach to running a trumpet class. I had everybody playing together. I had everybody playing for each other. At the end of the teaching day, I would run a trumpet class where we would all. We would first start by warming up in a circle, and then we would actually, the students would actually play for one another, and I would invite criticism, constructive criticism, because I think it's a learning process for the students to not only know how to play, but know how to listen and know how to critique and know how to express these things. So I think that it was a double sort of learning experience for them. And I mean, sometimes I had to keep the lid on things when things were potentially getting out of hand, but no, it was good. And I think the students got a lot out of it. And there are quite a few students who are playing professionally around Australia and overseas now who are part of that experience.
A very satisfying legacy.
Yeah.
So you made the decision to leave the SSO. Was that a hard decision?
It was a hard decision. I mean, it was, it's something I think every professional performer experiences, this sort of transition where it's becomes playing the trumpet in the orchestra almost becomes who you are as opposed to what you do. You know, if it's a passionate sort of occurs. So I think there's a very difficult transition period where it's no, it's not who I am, but it's what I do, what I enjoy, what I did, and it's still once it's in your blood, it's in your blood. I mean, I still practice a couple of hours every morning, and I still teach. I've got students coming this week, but it's because it's a passion, but now it's a quiet passion. Now it's, I guess, I'm a lot more comfortable and happier with the sort of role as coach, and helping others to find their potential, to find their pathways.
And how long did it take you to get to that point?
Oh, to be honest, it was at least a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, I would hear Mahler Symphony on the radio, and I start getting teary, thinking, "Oh, I'm never going to play that again." Blah blah blah. And but it does take a little while, I think, for you to sort of kind of reset a few of the hardwired circuits.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, so you're still practicing and you're still teaching, but how do you fill your day with other things? Do you have you discovered other things in your, let's call it retirement, but it's not really. Have you found other things in?
Oh well, it's funny. We've do a lot of traveling now, and we have connections, some very strong connections in Germany and Switzerland. I mean, a lot of these were former colleague musical connections, but we just 2 weeks ago got back from a trip. We were over in Europe for 2 months, traveling and seeing people. So I'm studying languages now and doing a bit of that every day, and just trying to sort of experience other cultures and that sort of thing. So very, very passionate about that.
And tell me, when you see that there's a new trumpet come out, do you get excited wanting to try it?
It's funny because no, I'm a little bit of a what they call an anachrophile. I like my old trumpets. I was very lucky enough to get some very, very good instruments, and in fact, the main instrument, the C trumpet that I play now, was one that I bought, I think, in 1979 or 1980, and still going strong. And I quite honestly tried the new instruments and think, well, yeah, they're all right, but it doesn't feel like home. You know, this one feels like part of me. And I had the very fortunate experience last year. I was looking through Facebook Marketplace, of all places, and a guy that I knew from the University of Kansas was selling now trumpet players will recognize it, a Mount Vernon Bach Stradivarius trumpet, built in the year I was born. And this thing was a closet queen. We call it a closet queen, meaning it was kept in a closet for decades. And I've seen new instruments that don't look as new as this one. And he was selling it. And I wrote him a quick letter. The minute I saw it, said, "Steve, whatever it is, I'll have it." I mean, he was actually asking a very reasonable price for a Mount Vernon trumpet in that condition. I said, I haven't tried it, but this is built in. I'll give my age away. It's built in 1954. I will have this. Thank you. And so I got him to send it to my brother, who lives in Austin, Texas. And last year I went over and picked it up. And it's wonderful. Because I do some little modifications, little tweaks to most instruments, but I got it playing just the way I wanted it to. So it's very, very happy with it.
Well, Dan, thanks so much. What an incredible story you've just told. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Mark.